Hi folks, Josh Grant the First here with another episode of Exade Replay, coming to you with episode 34 of the series. Let's get right into it. So this week on the show, we're definitely moving the plot forward. Thankfully, we didn't have anything changing in this episode as far as the opening goes, but I'm willing to bet that's going to change as of next week. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's go ahead and talk about what happened at the beginning. So at the start of the show, the bulk of what's going on happens there at the CR. Again, we're doing this thing where we're having to catch Hiro's dad up on everything that happened at the end of the last episode. Now we see that everyone in the CR is still debating how exactly to handle this new situation now that Hiro has sided himself with Kronos, for good reason. Everybody seems to understand this and is on the same page. They also realize that yes, Masamune Dan does have the correct gasha that is necessary to bring Saki back, so you can't really blame him. And this is going to be the bulk of everyone's opinion for most of the episode. Now for the most part, nobody actually really has a problem with his girlfriend coming back. Everybody would actually prefer it. It's just the fact that Masamune is using this to create a situation where he can control Hiro, thereby controlling the pieces of his game, Kamen Rider Chronicle. Now, like I was saying at the end of last episode, Palat and Graphite are starting to figure out that they need to do something more than what they've done thus far. So the first thing they need is more information. So they show up there in the CR to ask Shinkuroto Dan just what exactly do we need to defeat him, namely, what is this new thing that we're hearing about called Game Days. Based off the information they're given by Shinkuroto Dan and Poppy, they figure out that the inverse is true of what they've been told so far. If Kronos is the only thing that can defeat Game Deus, then Game Deus must be the only thing that can defeat Kronos. So they decide to put a plan into action. But up to that point, they decide the only way to get that information was to threaten Hiro's dad, which really doesn't amount to much at this point. He's more comic relief than anything else. I really wish that wasn't the case, but somebody has to be, since Poppy is no longer that, and especially not Emu. Now, in the initial fight that we have in this episode, we see that they're trying to save another patient who has just been infected with Bugster virus. He's not playing Kamen Rider Chronicle, so that's a switch up from the last couple of weeks. But we see here that Hiro is still trying to be the enforcer there for Masamune. Now, the thing about it is, we're starting to see what his motivation is as far as why he's doing this. It's one thing to understand that, yes, he wants Saki back, but he's putting a lot of things on the line, and everyone at the CR, including Taiga, tells him as much. The idea that Hiro would so willingly put his career at risk. They tell him that if anybody knew that you were actively trying to keep somebody infected, you could lose your doctor license, and we thought that meant the world to you. Saki thought that meant the world to you. And Emu brings this up blatantly to him. We're aware of what her motivation was for you. But we also see that Hiro as a character is still reeling from her loss. He blames himself now, fully, for her disappearance. It used to be that he would blame Taiga for not doing his job as the original Kamen Rider, but he seems to have absolved him of this guilt. Now, it makes sense that as a character, Hiro would want to make these decisions for love, for his lost love there in Saki, but of course, this is kind of a monkey paw situation where you think you're going to get something, but it's not exactly what you want. This is further evidenced when Masamune proves his power to Hiro and also tells him, yeah, I can bring her back whenever I want, but you have to work for it. This is a corporation, you are now my employee. So Hiro's having to realize now that he's having to push himself further and further away from his ideals as his doctor to get what he actually wants. Now, is he going to turn away from this? I imagine so, but at this point, it makes sense for his character, so that's good. Now, as a result of that first fight, we see that Emu had his gamer driver taken away from him by Hiro, and of course we all remember that that gamer driver was given to him by Kiria back in episode 12 during his disappearance. And now we see that there's going to be a problem, except there's not, because we see that Shinkuroto Dan at some point off-screen fixed his corrupted gamer driver that happened a couple of episodes back, so now there's no problem, but now that means there's an extra gamer driver on the field. I wonder who's gonna use it. Now, if you see where this is going, if you watched the previews for last week, or if you've even been keeping up with scans, you know what's going to happen, but it's nice to see how we got there. We did see here earlier that there was somebody who was infected with Bugster virus, and that Emu's been the one to try and take care of that, and Hiro's been getting in the way. The interesting thing that I see here is that there's another Kamen Rider who's not on the field here. And no, I'm not talking about Shinkuroto Dan. The fact that he's working on a new gasha to try and defeat Kronos, that's fine for his character. I'm talking about Poppy. Poppy is a fully capable Kamen Rider, yet this whole episode she sits it out and leaves it to Emu to take care of the patient, when she could clearly still do that. She still has her driver, her gasha is still intact, there is nothing wrong with her helping out, so why doesn't she? Much the same thing with Saiba Nico. She tries to interfere, but Taiga holds her back. Now admittedly, as far as on a personal level, Taiga understands why Hiro is doing this, so as far as Saibanika goes, keeping her out of it for Taiga's sake and characterization, that I get, but that doesn't excuse Poppy. I'm starting to wonder if we are ever going to see her again as a Kamen Rider. In the last fight that we have in this episode, we see that everyone's desires are coming to a head. We have Paradox and Graphite taking on Kronos, and then we have Exade fighting Brave, all for their own reasons. The thing about it is, we see further that Hiro doesn't really have a choice. He's doing everything begrudgingly. As we saw earlier, Masamune was able to prove that he can bring Saki back, but only up to a point. Now, my question here is just how much is he telling the truth? He tells Hiro he's not lying, but I do think there's a couple of catches that he just hasn't filled him in on. When we saw Kuroto Dan come back from the dead, essentially, we saw that he had to come back as a bugster, and he had already laid out the groundwork for that. Since Saki isn't necessarily a bugster, and Masamune is alluding to her coming back as a human, there may be some hitches there that he just doesn't know about or hasn't told Hiro about. But this does widely leave open the character we're about to see come back in just a minute. And just like last week's episode, we see that the people fighting had a very decent plan, but something on the other side screwed it up. So Paulette and Graphite decided that the thing that they needed was a sample of the Game Deus virus, which they can find readily in Kamen Rider Chronicle. So the idea is to infect Graphite with it and use that to infect Kronos, so that specifically when he tries to use Pause, he can't because that's being disrupted by the Game Deus data. That does seem to work for a second, except a mysterious, or rather not so mysterious, actually very familiar writer shows up to go ahead and remove that from him. Now before we get into that, I do want to go ahead and talk about the juxtaposition between how Emu has grown as a character and Hiro has almost come down from his pedestal and become more human. At the beginning of this fight, we see that their ideologies are clashing here. Emu has finally taken to heart that he needs to put aside his emotions for the sake of the patient, because they do have to take care of many patients as doctors, whereas Hiro is being incredibly selfish here, again for good reason, but that's very out of character for him, but as such that's growing him. And Emu still tries to save him in his own way, in targeting the bugster directly and not wanting to hurt Hiro more than he already has to. But again, this is completely undone when Emu gets taken aback by the sight of the new rider on the scene, Lazer. Now, is it the Lazer we know and love? We don't know yet. We only see the suit there, now being referred to as Kamen Rider Lazer Turbo Level 0. So as Level 0, he was able to go ahead and dispel the virus there in Kronos' belt. But as such, we also see that he's referred to as the left-hand man, Hiro being the right. So now we see that Kronos has two guards on his side. He's pretty much got his own posse there. But the bigger implication is the fact that he is, in fact, back from the dead. Now, did we see him out of suit? Unfortunately not. They're saving that for next week's episode, where we're going to have to deal with the implications of what it means for Kiria to be back from the dead, as well as seeing Hiro get a new power given to him by Kronos. So, as far as moving the plot along, yeah, this is a really big thing. Something that's been very central to the core of the story here, Kiria's death, has been effectively undone here. So, the thing about it is, I'm hoping that next week's explanation doesn't cheapen the fact that he's been gone for so long. This is something I've been worrying about for several weeks now, but I can only hope that with as rich as the storytelling has been and as much attention as they've been paying to detail, they will do good on that part. But bottom line is, he's back. And that's good. Right? I hope. And yes, that's a lot of plot to move forward, but I want to hear about what you guys thought in the comments below. So let's go ahead and talk about this. First, let's see about the idea of a revived bugster versus a revived human. Do you think Saki's actually going to come back as a human, or do you think she's more bugster and Masamune is not telling the whole truth? The next thing, what about Kronos' plan? The fact that he's looking at this in the long term. He wants employees, he wants structure. Do you think that's good for a Kamen Rider villain, or do you think that it should have been something a little more hokey even? And lastly, what do you think about Lazer's new look? Now that he's got more of a humanoid look than his bike form before, do you prefer this look or do you miss the old thing? You tell me in the comments below. And of course, during the week, you guys can always talk to me over on social media. On Twitter, I'm at JoshKnight1st. This has been episode 34 of Kamen Rider Exade Replay for episode 34 of the series, Accomplished Rebirth. I'm Josh Knight the First. I'll see you guys again next week.